Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my honour today to second the motion brought forward by my colleague from Halton Hills. I stand firmly with the rest of my party in condemning the actions of Vladimir Putin and their Russian regime against our allies in Ukraine, our democratic friends in the Ukraine. 1.3 million Ukrainian descendants are here in Canada. They are one of our most important allies in the world, and we need to stand with them strongly at this point in time and make sure that we speak and act accordingly so that this does not continue as much as we can. The other day I heard from a friend, and he's got a cousin who is over in the Ukraine, who was here in Canada for 20 years, but she chose to go back to Ukraine because she retired, and she had an inheritance there and a small house that she got from her family. So that's where she retired. That house was destroyed earlier this week by a tank. Her name is Luda, and now she's in hiding. Luda's family is asking that we quickly allow 200,000 refugees to come from Ukraine, at least temporarily. And we've seen the backlog at the border with Poland. They are not going to be able to shelter all of these refugees alone. We need to help. Canada needs to help, and quickly. Rex Tillerson, former head CEO of ExxonMobil, one of the world's largest oil and gas producers, said in 2014 when Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine, "We don't take sides in international conflicts." This is an absurd statement. We need to know what side of humanity we are on. There is no commodity, there is no dollar earned that is more important than the lives that are being trampled by Vladimir Putin. Rex Tillerson's words represent the decline of Western values to the point where nothing matters more than money. This needs to change immediately. The evidence is clearly at our doorsteps, and I've heard the meek calls from world leaders that we can't disrupt Russia's oil and gas exports for various reasons. One, it will cause a spike in oil prices that will cause financial hardship in the world. Ironic, considering the intent of all our various tax measures on the oil and gas industry, excise taxes, royalties, carbon taxes, the one that's going to be escalating by 25% in less than a month in Canada. These are all designed to do exactly that, make the consumption of hydrocarbons more expensive so that people believe that the expensive alternatives are more palatable. I suppose the message is make it more expensive just on our own terms. But an action to disrupt Russia's trade in oil and gas in the world is going to have some financial consequences on those countries that have chosen, yes, chosen, to have the resources supplied by Russia. This will cause inflation, no doubt. Just as every other input increasing prices on oil and gas impacts inflation, and we are experiencing significant inflation. Two, Europe's economy is dependent on the supply of Russian natural gas. Well, that is also a choice that has been made in spite of the danger that was always evident of having such a large portion of energy supply coming from an unpredictable and despotic regime. Yes, jobs will be impacted. Three, Europeans will freeze at the end of the winter. Yes, the absence of natural gas delivered to Europe will cause some discomfort, some of which we have already seen as energy prices have skyrocketed in Europe this year. Europe is entering a period of energy poverty, and it has always been looking for a quick fix. Well, it turns out that the impacts of being overly reliant on Russian gas supply is not the quick fix that leaders without foresight envisioned or ignored at their own consequences. Let's put those consequences, and there are more, but for succinctness, let's put these three consequences briefly together. Higher costs for hydrocarbon energy, something we in the West have been manipulating higher through government action for years. But higher costs suddenly will cause inflation and hardship and choices. Economic displacement. European factories will need to adjust, and some will shut down the supply of energy to the cost of energy become prohibitive. Again, we in the Western world have been offshoring our jobs for years to parts of the world with lower environmental standards and lower labor standards. Heating for homes, there is going to be some discomfort. Let's compare these hardships that I've just outlined here, these three hardships, to what Luda is experiencing in Ukraine right now. A country is being destroyed. There is no economy or jobs that will matter in the midst of a shelling war. Luda's home was destroyed by a Russian tank. The juxtaposition is stark. And the world is soft-pedaling our response to Russia because we need their oil and gas. The irony is stark. Can we ask quickly, where do we draw the line here? After Ukraine, when Poland or Moldova is in Russia's sights, we need to collectively act now and ensure the entire world rejects Russian commodities. Such is the cost of tyranny, which we have been ignoring for years. This Canadian government has been a willing part of this abject shift. Dollars have flown to Russia because of this government's regard for Canada's resource industry. In the last 7 years, oil production in Russia has gone up by 1 million barrels a day. Gas exports have gone up 35% from Russia. Disdain for Canadian resources have led oil and gas exploration elsewhere, including the world majors. Shell and British Petroleum have just recently decided they'd extract themselves from Russia and losing $20 billion and $25 billion respectively in the process. But the largest beneficiary, particularly for the flow of capital, has been Russia, which has profited by hundreds of billions of dollars because of choices such as the ones this government has made. These are choices. All these choices have consequences. The consequences of curtailing Canadian oil and gas development through various ill-advised methods has led to the void being filled by less transparent regimes, primarily Russia. Our naive policies have put hundreds of billions of dollars into the pockets of a despotic regime. And this week I asked the government to actually curtail oil imports into Canada from Russia. And they said we hadn't imported crude since 2019. Subsequently, they recognized there's more to oil than crude, and they did suggest, and I think they're going to follow through, on actually canceling all crude oil imports, and I hope that happens immediately. Our naive say, we have helped finance, through this transfer of money, a military buildup in Russia. Our military has shrunk. We do not meet our international obligations from a military perspective. Now, I remember a song from when I was young, and it was from a Canadian band, and the gist of it was, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. This is a choice we've made without any eye on the consequences here. Pipelines. When I ran for Parliament 2 years ago, going on to 2.5 years ago, it was to get pipelines built. There is no better infrastructure for helping the Canadian economy, for helping the world environment, than Canadian pipelines delivering Canadian product to markets. Canadian natural gas production has gone down in the last 7 years. Russia's has gone up by 35%. Again, a juxtaposition that is stark. West Coast had 14 LNG facilities in line to be built in Canada. Now there's one that is being built. In the US in the meantime, they've fully built 7 and 5 more are being built. Think about how we don't get things done in this country anymore. Things that will help the world from an environmental perspective and from an economic perspective and from, of course, a democratic perspective. One of the issues on natural gas, of course, is that it isn't just a fuel. It is also an input to fertilizer. And feeding 8 billion people in the world requires natural gas fertilizer that is going to continue to be necessary if we aren't going to have a crisis at some point in time in the future. So getting that natural gas to where it's needed for fertilizer is essential. I spoke last night for 20 minutes with a gentleman named Kirill, and he's a temporary foreign worker from the Ukraine working in Alberta's oil fields. And he was pleading with me, and he ended up shouting at me and apologizing to me. And I felt awful, because he shouldn't be apologizing to me. But he's from Kirkov, and he has seen his city destroyed. He has seen his family displaced. They're looking for places to stay. And I am sorry to him that we can't act more forcefully here in getting this under control. Madam Speaker, we need to act. We need to act quickly and decisively as soon as we can. Slava Ukrainia.
In comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Madam Speaker. As I think we all know, President Zelensky of Ukraine has asked Canada for military aid, lethal and non-lethal weapons, which we've delivered, financial assistance, which we've delivered, sanctions, which we've delivered. Every ask that President Zelensky has made, we've delivered on. He has not asked us to build pipelines in Canada. Why is this the Conservative Party's priority? Is it an attempt to help Ukraine, or is it a crass throwback to a 20th century Conservative Party policy instead of a 21st century solution to a problem we're facing today?
I do want to remind members that when somebody's asking the questions, there's no sense of trying to answer before the honourable member who actually has the floor right after will be able to answer. I'm sure that the honourable member of Calgary Centre is able to respond to the question. The honourable member of Calgary Centre.
First of all, I thank my honourable colleague for the question. I'm unfamiliar with his timeline here on 20th century versus 21st century. The solution is more environmental power to the world, more ESG, as we say, environmentally friendly, but socially friendly, and governance according investments in natural gas supply to an energy-starved world. That starts with natural gas, and that's what's been held up by this government since it came to power, when we had the best rocks in the world, the best ability to get a good resource to the world for its actual consumption, and we've put the world in a position where they're reliant on despotic resources. That is, as I said, a choice we have made. And there is a consequence to that choice. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for defending his party's motion, but we will not be supporting it because it doesn't actually help the Ukrainian crisis. Neither Europe nor Ukraine have asked for Canada's oil from Alberta. And given that this is a short-term crisis that we all hope will not drag on, there are countries that are much better placed than Canada to provide oil and gas. These are countries that already have pipelines to export to Europe. So the only way that this Conservative motion could actually get results would be on a very long-term basis. By isolating Russia in the long term, now, is that what we want? So does our colleague understand that, we would need the war to last 15 years for their solution to actually be effective? The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre. I thank my colleague for the question. I think that I understood most of the question. It's very important to have a supply of Canadian gas around the world. Right now, a lot of oil is coming from Russia. There may be demand for that oil in China, but the exports from Russia to China are very important, and we need more pipelines here as well. But this is a global issue, and we need to address it with our oil here in Canada. Thank you. Question, the honourable member for Nunavut.
I'd like to thank the member for Calgary Centre. According to the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, about 1.45 million people are still internally displaced after fleeing the conflict in Donbass and from occupied Crimea. Save the Children states that children in eastern Ukraine have grown up in conflict for the past 8 years, enduring violence, shelling, and being displaced from their homes. Even before this latest escalation of tensions, 2.9 million people, including over 400,000 children, already required humanitarian assistance. Does the member not agree that if Canada is to truly stand with the Ukrainian people, that we must focus our energy on humanitarian efforts and not on measures to further exploit land and resources by expanding oil and gas operations? The honourable member of Calgary Centre.
Well, I thank my colleague for that question. The most important thing to do right now is to make sure that we're standing firm with the Ukrainian people in the plight they're facing from an aggressive neighbor that wants to defeat them. This is the first thing we have to look at. How do we help them as much as possible? And part of that is the displacement of refugees that's occurring immediately. And you'll recall in my speech, my colleague will recall, that we actually were looking at 200,000 people being allowed into Canada here on a temporary basis. That's the first step. We also need to address how this is happening, why it's happening, and how we can avoid it happening again in the future. Part of that is the supply of energy. Thank you.
Resuming debate.